I'm just start. There we go. Recording on.
Well, thanks everyone for coming along tonight. We've got a very famous botanist speaking to us, the well-known Ro Scott. Now, Ro tells me that she was born in the deep south and managed to move north as far as York to do her to uni, and then discovered the Highlands and Islands and thought this is the place for me. So after a few jobs, she ended up with a permanent post with what was the Nature Conservancy of Scotland, probably, and is now Nature Scots. Did her time at the cold face, did 30 years there, and then got let out for good behaviour. And the last 10 years of her working life, she tells me she was a self employed ecological consultant. Now, I only know Scott as a mine of information about all things botanical, but she tells me that she didn't learn that at uni at all. And she's had to learn that on the job, as it were, from fellow botanists, from presumably courses, from the BSBI, from area recorders, the whole lot of things, which is maybe why she's so helpful to all of us who are trying to learn as well. So I think we're going to have an interesting talk to find out a little bit about her stravaiging around Scotland about the plants. So over to you, Ro. Thank
Right,
you.
thanks. Now, if I go share, I think, and hopefully something will happen. Oh, that's it. Now let's go full picture. Right, can you see a picture of me in front of Ben Loyal?
Not yet.
Oh, ah, oh, that's funny. It worked. I practiced with Audrey yesterday and it
Yeah,
worked fine.
just checking that everything.
I wonder,
Yeah, everything's set up. You should be able to.
shall I come out of it and try again then?
Yeah, yeah.
Close that and now where I'm just assuming it's the green. Let's try. Oh, there's a
Ah,
different one.
there we go. Something's
Oh, is that
happening.
it now? Right, let's go.
There we go. Yeah,
Is that it?
that's
That's
it.
better.
Yeah.
Yes, now I can see all you in a strip down the side of the screen. That's it. Right. Well, this is going to be a very personal talk, really, about various botanical trips that I've been on over the years around the Highlands and Islands with various friends and with the botany group as I mean, not saying you're not friends, you know what I mean. Botany group and other friends. Um, but I'll just begin with a short section about botanical recording, what it is, why we do it, what happens to the information, just as a quick intro. I'm sure most of you know that already, but I'm doing this talk at one or two other places as well, so I put that in. So anyway, here we are. You might remember this from the trip up to the Coronation Meadow when we were at Force of Nature a couple of years ago. So the first bit's really about plant recording, how we do it, why we do it, why plants are found in different plants are found in different places, and then we'll get on to a bit of a circular tour of the Highlands and Islands, looking at various plants in those places. Now, I'm concentrating on the vascular plants, or higher plants as they're sometimes called, which are just the flowering plants and ferns. So there won't be any fungi, bryophytes or lichens. And I'm suppose concentrating on the way that the BSBI do things. Last talk we heard from the Wildflower Society, and this time I'm going to concentrate more about the type of recording that the BSBI does. And this is based on a system of what are called vice counties. This isn't anything to do with vice. It's because some of the counties were split into more than one county. So you've got East Sutherland and Northwest Sutherland. So that's why the word vice crept in there. And each of these vice counties has a recorder appointed by the BSBI, or nowadays more than usually the recordership is shared between two or more people. And we've got a couple of them with us tonight. I see Brian and Mary Dean are here, who are the joint recorders for Easter Ross, as I'm sure everybody knows. So here are three more recorders in this picture. This was on a trip to Mull with Lynn Farrell on the left, who's the recorder for Mull, Col and Tiree. Gordon Rotherow, who's recently retired as the recorder for mainland Argyll, and Stephen Bungard, who's the recorder for Skye and the Small Isles. So just to say how the BSBI system works, really, it's based on the 10 kilometre squares of the national grid, of which the one I'm showing here is the one at which my house is more or less in the middle of, which is NH76. And each, for the purposes of botanical recording, each square is divided into, well, it's divided into 101 kilometre squares, but historically botanical recording has been done on the basis of tetrads, which are 2 by 2 kilometre squares. And these are numbered or lettered within the 10 km square vertically from bottom to top. So you get this system shown up on the left here, where across the line below the top it spells the word Dinty, which isn't a word, but it's a handy acronym for remembering how you number how you name your squares. So the recording card that's used has a little handy aid memoir about this system with the Dinty across the middle. And on one side of the card, there's all the stuff about where you are and who was there, what the habitat was, and you write down any interesting species that you saw or species of note. And then on the back, the other side has the list of all the abbreviated Latin names of all the species that you're likely to find. These cards that can be downloaded from the BSBI website, and you can get one for each of the optimized for each of the vice counties. So this is the, oh, sorry, didn't do that. Back. Previous, where's previous? There it is. Sorry, folks. So this is the one for Easter Ross, which has all the most commonly found plants in Easter Ross. The ones which are slightly rarer, which you need to make a note of on the front of the card, are in bold, like Betula here for the dwarf birch, which if you found it in Easter Ross would be noteworthy. And just this kind of recording gives rise to these maps based on the 10 kilometre squares of the national grid. And just to show two contrasting species, on the left, a very common widespread species that's found throughout the whole of Britain and Ireland, Festuca rubra, the red fescue. And then on the right, the Scottish primrose, Primula scotica, which is extremely rare and is also endemic to the British Isles, i.e. it's not found anywhere else in the world and only occurs along the north coast, a bit round to the east coast and in Orkney. So just two contrasting distributions. I should say that all of these maps that I've used are freely available online in the online BSBI Atlas 2020, which is an absolute mine of information if you want to know anything about the distribution of any plants anywhere in Britain and Ireland. And this just shows that over the course of the past few decades, the BSBI have produced 3 of these plant atlases, one in 1962, one in 2002, and the latest one, Atlas 2020, which came out in 2023. And that's the one which is also available online as a fully sort of interactive resource, which is incredibly useful. And again, this kind of information can also be put into local floras. Now there are local floras or checklists of most of the vice counties in Scotland, I think, and these are just a few examples. The flora of Rum, which is just one particular island, which is part of a bigger vice county. Assynt by the late Pat and Ian Evans and Gordon Rotherow, and then Mary McCallum Webster's Flora of Murray Nairn and East Inverness Shire. And also this kind of information can be used in things like monitoring the state of nature. This is the State of Nature report, which is produced by a whole consortium of different conservation organisations in Scotland. And then things like biodiversity action plans, which this one's the Highland one. And then the Britain's Changing Flora was a booklet produced as a result of the Atlas 2020, talking about what the main changes have been in the British flora since the previous atlas in the year 2000. So, I mean, the whole point of doing this recording is that you can't know how to conserve your habitats, species and habitats, if you don't know where they are. So the first point is to do the recording and find out what's where. So in terms of, oh, I've done it again, sorry, previous. In terms of learning, there's a massive quantity of books, as I'm sure you're all aware, about how to identify different plants in different groups. But really the best way to learn it is to go out with other people and learn together. And this, the picture on the left is the plant families, the first plant families workshop that we had a few years ago at the Spectrum Centre in Inverness. And then on the right, I'm sure those of you that were there will remember the evenings at the Force of Nature, having a look at specimens and identifying things in the evenings. And I put the Inverness Botany Group logo and the Botanical Society of Scotland logo there, as well as other societies. I should, after the last talk, I should have added the Wildflower Society as well, because I'm sure the same learning experience happens on their trips as it does on ours. And then going into what's called citizen science, really, where different groups of people all over the country contribute to a bigger picture of what's happening. There are things like the New Year plant hunt, which we've done for the past few years. And I can put in a quick plug here. The one coming up this coming New Year will be on the 4th of January, and we'll be going to Rosemarkie, the same as we have done in the previous years, to see how many plants we can find that are actually flowering at New Year. And this obviously has relevance in relation to how plants are responding to climate change. And one can look at the website as the survey takes place and see what other people are finding in other parts of the country as well. And then the other thing we do is the National Plant Monitoring Scheme. And here are a couple of shots of different plots that I've been helping Lynn Farrell with on Mull, on a bog plot and a grassland plot, which is somewhat different from the one we do at Hillock Head on the Black Isle, which is very much a woodland plot with the different permanent, well, they're not permanently marked on the ground, but we know where they are, permanent quadrats that you go out and record. Not necessarily every year, because things don't change that fast, really, but every few years. And this all goes into a central database to monitor how things are changing across the country. So a bit about what determines the distribution of different plants. What we call native plants are those ones which are deemed to have arrived in the islands of Britain and Ireland before we were cut off from the rest of Europe at the end of the last ice age. And this, I found this map online, which gives a really good impression of how things used to be at the height of the ice age. We were part of a very much larger land mass, which went all the way from Denmark right round Britain and joined up with France. And oh dear, I wish I didn't keep doing this. Just touch the mouse and it goes on to the next slide. Anyway, yes, as the ice gradually melted, as the climate warmed up after the last ice age, this land mass, the bit in the North Sea, was known as Doggerland, and what's left now is the Dogger Bank, is a shallow area of the North Sea, which is really the only remnant left, where they sometimes dredge up interesting artifacts from the times when it was dry land. But once the English Channel filled with water, which was about 9,000 years ago, and on here it says 7,000 BC, so you've got to add on the 2,000 years of AD. So about 9,000 years ago, the Channel filled with water and we were cast adrift from the rest of Europe. That's not a political statement. So at that time, it's reckoned that about 1,600 species of vascular plants have made it across to what is now Britain and Ireland. But since then, an even larger number of other species have arrived, largely through human agency. So I think the latest figure is about 1,753 or something. non-native vascular plants have arrived to or more than double the British flora, which is quite a thought, really. And in terms of geology, which also has a great effect on what plants grow where, because they all have different preferences in terms of their minerals and other things. So this was the most simplified geological map of the Highlands that I could come across. And you can see going from the east of the country, we have the old red sandstone, this sort of orangey stuff, which is a sedimentary rock and can be quite calcareous in places. And then the vast bulk of the landscape is made up of this slightly mustardy coloured moin schist, which is a metamorphic rock and much harder and therefore lacking in available nutrients. And then along the Moyne thrust zone, we have the Durness limestone, this pale grey band, which is quite hard metamorphosed limestone. There are other bits of more softer, more recent limestone in Skye. And then in the extreme west, to the west of the Moyne thrust, we have the Lewisian gneiss, which is the same stuff that most of the Outer Hebrides are made of, which is a very, very ancient hard rock, thought to be one of the oldest rocks on the planet. And then in much more recently in geological terms, we've got what's called the Tertiary Igneous Province, which is an area of now comprising Skye, Rum, Mull, Ardnamurchan, which about 60 million years ago was an active volcanic area. So that has a lot of basalts and volcanic igneous rocks, which are again are quite rich in not necessarily calcium, but quite rich in magnesium, which again makes them suitable for different plants. And the other thing which has a great effect is the climate. And on the left here is a map of relative oceanicity, which is really the degree of rainfall and temperature differential between the west and the east of the country, because most of our weather systems are coming off the Atlantic. The west coast obviously is a lot wetter, and also because of the maritime influence, the temperature range is much less. So the oceanic climate has a narrow temperature range, so it's cool in summer and cool in winter, really. Whereas the further east you go, it becomes the extremes are further apart. And that map was drawn by Ben Averis, who will be coming to give us our final talk of the year in, I think it's in March. I wrote it down somewhere so I would remember. Anyway, sure that'll be made, knowledge will be spread of that when it comes to it. And then on the other side is a map of the interaction between climate and altitude. So going from left to right, you're going further north, and then going up the way is the altitude. And this just shows how the distribution of the yellow saxifrage, Saxifraga azoides, where it's the proportions of it that are found at different degrees north and altitude. So you can see that when you get extremely north, it's found right quite low down at all latitudes, but it's also one of these things that you can, whilst it's on mountains in most of its range within Scotland, when you get to the north coast, you can find it right down at sea level at the back of the beach. And then another thing that's had a big influence is not just the way the land's used at the moment, but how the land has been used in the past, and things like grazing history, burning history, deforestation, all that kind of thing can have a big effect. And these are just some examples of, you often see like a wooded island in a loch when the rest of the surroundings is completely bare of trees, or isolated old trees where most of their contemporaries have gone, but somebody's tried to put up a fence and plant some younger trees round about. Or management as wood pasture. This is a very ancient alder tree up in North Sutherland, and it looks as though it's been pollarded probably at some time in the past to provide food for the livestock. And again, the things that we all know about that you tend to only find growing on cliff ledges now, the very palatable things that are attractive to grazing animals like roseroot and globe flowers and so forth, which tend to have been eaten out from most of the places where they would have originally grown. But in areas where people are reducing the numbers of both livestock and wild herbivores, mainly deer, you can see these plants beginning to come back off their ledges and come down onto the rest of the ground. So this is where we start the tour around the Highlands, and it's a kind of a loop from starting in Easter Ross, then going down across, not exactly down the Great Glen, to the west coast, to Lismore, where we were this year, Mull, Colonsay, Tyree, Muck, where we were a few years ago, Skye, back up to Wester Ross, and then up to northwest Sutherland, and finishing up on the north coast. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but here we go. Easter Ross, a familiar view looking across the Firth towards the South Sutor from Firish Hill, just to set the context. And here we all are having lunch on the beach below the cliffs in Easter Ross. And this was on a trip led by Brian, who is there. And one of the things that we were seeing there includes some of these coastal species like the sea sandwort, Honkinia peploides, which grows at the very top of the strand line it's sort of usually on sandy ground, and has a very coastal distribution. I can't see this because this is where the pictures of all you are on my screen down there, obscuring the map. But anyway, you can see it has a very coastal distribution. And similarly, this one, which used to be called Glauc's maritima, which was always one of those names that you remembered because it's such a funny word, but the taxonomists have had a rethink, and it's now called Lysimachia maritima, the sea milkwort. Again, very, very coastal in its distribution, but also, well, it's always coastal, but as well as occurring on sandy substrates, it's found on salt marshes as well. And then one of the specialities really of the sandy coast, the oyster plant, Mertensia maritima. Again, this is a rarer species, and has quite particular requirements. It seems to like a particular size of grains of sand or gravel, and also places where there's a bit of water seepage coming through, fresh water seepage coming through underneath. And that's it with its flowers. I'm told it's called oyster plant because the leaves taste like oysters, but I don't think nowadays it would be really the done thing to try eating it. And these little black seeds, it was pleasing to see it actually having seeds in this location because they float off in the sea and land up on another beach somewhere else. And if it's suitable, it may germinate and grow there. So it does tend to come and go a bit around the coast. But like a lot of things, it seemed to have been disappearing from more sites than appearing. And another rarity of the Easter Ross coastline is the purple Oxytropis halleri, which is a member of the legume family, very similar to milkvetch, Astragalus danicus, but you have to be careful in differentiating them. But again, it's restricted to very few places in Britain now. Well, and always, I think it's always been quite a rare thing. And just a quick excursion to the Fairy Glen, where we get one or two typical woodland plants, bluebell, everybody knows that one, and then the woodruff and the Moschatel or town hall clock. I'm afraid these two photos are grossly out of scale with one another because the woodruff is a much bigger plant. The Moschatel is about 2 inches high, so maybe I shouldn't have put them both on the same slide, but there you go. And coral root orchid, another one found usually under woodland. It has an association with willow trees. It's one of these plants that doesn't really have its own chlorophyll and is semi-parasitic on the roots of willow trees. So it's found at places like Balmaduthie and other places in the Cairngorms, and it tends to have a kind of quite an eastern distribution, really. And the twin flower, another one which found in woodlands, usually at pine woods. I remember we've seen this at Balblair Woods up at Golspie, and it occurs in the Black Isle and various other places. And then in terms of a bit of an outlier, Craig Wood in Dingwall is this somewhat bizarre plant, the toothwort Lathria squamaria, which again is I think it's called a hemiparasite. It has a relationship with tree roots from which it obtains its nutrients. And it was thought that it's mostly parasitic on elm trees, and most of the elm trees at Craigwood seem to be dying off. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But it did look to me the last time I was there as though some of the plants were coming up underneath hazel trees. So it may be, I don't know if it can transfer its allegiance or what. But as you can see from the distribution map, that one occurrence of it here at Dingwall is very much the northernmost outlier of its whole distribution. And then heading up into the Cairngorms, this was us on the way up to Corrian-Lochan a few years ago. And some of the commonest species of sort of open moorland and hills, we all know heather, Calluna vulgaris, or ling heather, and then Erica cinerea, the bell heather, which is the one with the bigger, more bell-shaped and darker purple flowers. And then some more of these kind of dwarf shrubs that you find out on the hill, quite widely distributed. The cowberry, Vaccinium vitis idea, which has these pink flowers, and then the red berries. And another very similar one, the Arctostaphylos uva ursi, the bearberry, which also has pink flowers. Haven't got a picture of the berries. Oh well. And the dwarf cornel, which again we did see on that trip to Corrian-Lochan, which again I haven't got a picture of the flowers, but these are the berries of that. And again, it's very much a northern plant of the higher hills. And then another close relative of these, its name is Arctostaphylos alpinus, but its common name is the Arctic bearberry, and that seems like an anomaly, but it is distributed in both the Arctic and the Alps. And if you look at a map of its world distribution, it's very much more widespread around the northern hemisphere in the Arctic than the population in the Alps is the smaller component. But anyway, it has red berries, and then, well, they start red and then they turn black. And also in the winter, it has it's deciduous, and the leaves go really quite incredible bright, dark ruby red sort of colour, which is quite noticeable if you're out on the hills at that time of year. And the cloudberry is another one of these moorland types of plants, which again I always think of as being more common in the east, with its little four-petaled flowers and its orangey red berries. And again, in this country, you don't often see very much fruiting on it, whereas in other places, they get in Scandinavia, they get enough fruit to make it into a liqueur and jam and things like that. So I wouldn't recommend doing that here because it doesn't really get to fruit that much. You can also see in the middle here some blackberries, black coloured berries of the crowberry and Peachum nigrum in between the cloudberries. And some more slightly rarer plants of the uplands and corries, the alpine sawwort on the left, Sorceria alpina, and then on the right, the Oxyria digyna, the mountain sorrel, with its quite fleshy little kidney-shaped leaves. And this was in Corrian-Lochan, and we were heading up towards these crags up here to look for a real rarity, which was this one growing quite in a dark hollow where water sort of runs down over these slabs, and it's quite mossy. The Highlands saxifrage, Saxifraga rivularis. And as you can see from the map, that one is a real, I think that's nationally rare if these are the numbers of 10 kilometre squares that it occurs in, and if it occurs in less than 15, it's deemed to be nationally rare. So moving out a bit more onto the open hillsides and bogs, we have the hare's tail cotton grass, Eriophrum vaginatum. I found I hadn't got a decent picture of it. There are two more species of Eriophrum, Eriophrum angustifolium and Eriophrum latifolium, and I haven't got a photo of them. That's what I meant to say at the beginning, that this talk is really largely based on the plants that I happen to have a reasonable photograph of. So that's why it may appear a bit random. So moving along to Rannoch Moor now, getting down towards the Loch Arbor end of things. This was a BSBI meeting at Carrower, and you might remember Sarah Watts here on the right, who's the conservation manager at Carrower. We had a talk from her, I think it was last winter? I think it was. And Jim McIntosh, who is now retired, but he was the BSBI Scotland officer. And what we're all looking at is this extreme rarity, the Rannoch rush, Choixeria palustris, which was thought to only grow on Rannoch Moor. And up until relatively recently, or a few years ago, that's its distribution there is the Rannoch Moor part of it, which it is thought to be the last place from which an ice cap would have retreated at the end of the last ice age. So it is really a glacial relict. But then on another BSBI meeting a few years ago, it was found at another site a bit further north near Glengarry, which was a real turn up for the books when people came back and said, "You'll never guess what we've found." And the rest of us were all trying to guess what it could possibly be. And we thought of all these outrageously rare plants, and it wasn't any of those. And it turned out it was this one, the Rannoch rush. So not only confined to Rannoch Moor. It shows that if you have some people who know what they're looking for, who go to somewhere that people don't often go to, you can still find things that haven't been discovered. And then a slightly rarer plant of the bogs, the cranberry. And this piece of sward is quite a good example of a really nice piece of sort of wet boggy sward with, you can see the cranberry flowers and the little tiny leaves in between. We've got cloudberry, we've got blaeberry, Vaccinium myrtillus. So that almost looks like a bit of the dwarf cornel there. And then we've got the bog blaeberry as well, with these much more sort of glaucous rounded leaves. So a good selection of dwarf shrubs. Oh, and Empetrum, the crowberry. So a nice piece of bog vegetation. Right, now we've taken a quick jump down Loch Linney to Lismore, where we were this summer, just to have a quick look at one of the more unusual plants that we saw there, or at least some of us went looking for this one, the small cowwheat, Melompyrum sylvaticum. Now this is a small plant, it's an annual, and it usually grows in woodland, and it's very difficult to know why it grows where it does, because there are an awful lot of places that look very similar to the places where it does grow, but it's not in all those places. So it's a bit of a mystery. But one thing it does have is a system of dispersing its seeds, which depends on wood ants. So you would kind of think that it ought to only occur in places where wood ants occur. And I'm really not at all sure what the wood ant situation is on Lismore. I should have looked that up. But the seeds have an oil body called an eliosome, which is attractive to the ants. So the ants are, what generally happens is they carry off the seeds, they eat the oily, fatty, nutritious bit, and then leave the seeds. And apparently in some places, you can find this plant growing up around the outside of wood ant nests, because they've dropped the seeds there, they've eaten the juicy bit and left the rest of the seed. But in terms of how it keeps going on Lismore, I'm not entirely sure. and then a bit further down and across to Mull, Tobermory. And I've been going to Mull for about the past 20 years, I suppose, for about a week every year with Lynn Farrell, who's the recorder. And that's her doing the paperwork in the evening. This was in the Bothiat Berg, you know, on the end of, out on the Ross of Mull. And we had a trip there a few years ago. And some of the plants that we regularly see there, things like this. Again, another one used to be called Anagallis tenella, the bog pimpernel, and now the taxonomists have lumped it all in with Lysimachia. So it's Lysimachia tenella now, but a lovely little creeping plant in sort of damp places with short turf around the coast. I mean, you can see from the distribution map, it's quite coastal this far north. It's a bit more widespread further south. And another one that I was thinking was being typical of sort of west coast, rocky coasts, particularly where a trickle of fresh water comes down to the shore, and you find this, the brookweed Summerlus valerandi. And again, in the further north you go, the more it seems to be restricted to the west coast, whereas down south it can be found on the east coast as well. And then a short trip out to the Treshnish Isles. This is the distinctive shape of the Dutchman's cap. And you can see this is a part of the tertiary igneous basalt area geologically. And you can see these very steep, very well drained, and certainly on the south facing side, very sun-baked, steep, dry slopes. And you get a very particular type of turf here, a beautiful sward consisting of things like thyme and kidney vetch and bird's foot trefoil and clover, white clover, a great, lovely floriferous turf, in amongst which you can see these weird looking red things sticking up, which are, well, another one of these parasitic plants, the thyme broom rape, Orobanche alba. Now, I've no idea why it's called alba when it's obviously one of its main characteristics is that it's always pinky red. But anyway, there it is growing alongside the plant that it parasitizes, the thyme, along with some black spleenwort ferns as well. And then over to Colonsay. This is Killoran Bay, which those of us who were on the trip to Colonsay a few years ago hopefully will remember. I think that must be about 10 years ago. I'm not entirely sure. 2015, I've got written. Yes, it was 10 years ago we were there. And one of the things we saw there was the bulbous buttercup ranunculus bulbosus, which, as you'll hopefully remember, has the deflexed sepals, so the sepals point downwards, which is what distinguishes it apart. Well, its leaves are slightly different from all the other buttercups as well, but the reflexed sepals are the main distinguishing feature. And another typical west coast thing that's found on a lot of the islands out that way, the spring squirrel, Scilla verna, which can form a complete sort of sward, as on the left here, little blue stars quite early in the season, and later in the year you can still pick it up from the seed heads. These form little seed heads with black seeds in them, which persist on the plant for quite a long time throughout the year. And the pyramidal bugle, which I think, yeah, we saw this, seen this in a couple of places. Very much more sort of hairy than the ordinary Ajuga reptans. This one is Ajuga pyramidalis. That's the two of the same two growing there behind this rock. But again, very much restricted to the richer soils of the north and west. And then on to Tyree and some maca, another habitat that we're all probably familiar with, but which really is restricted to Scotland and the west of Ireland, where you have blown shell sand that is blown across the landscape and forms a beautiful sward, very flower-rich sward on the west coast. And here you find things like the pyramidal orchid in amongst the dunes, Anacanthus pyramidalis. And then a few other orchids, the early purple orchid, which really is pretty much purple all over with very few markings on the lip. We'll see some other orchids in a minute, which are much more noticeably marked. And as it said, this one comes out quite early in the season. So a couple more orchids. The northern marsh orchid on the right, you can see it has much more marked lower lip, and also has a green stem rather than a purple stem. And then the frog orchid, again, it really, most examples of it are only a couple of inches high, growing on maca and sand dune sort of turf and calcareous, richer grassland. Common century, another plant of the dunes and maca type places. And then this is Balaful Bay on Tiree, where you can find things like Ligusticum scoticum, Scots lovage. I was quite surprised to see this growing on sand, because I'd always thought of it as more of a thing that you find growing up on cliffs and inaccessible places, but it appears to be able to survive in more accessible places. I imagine it might be quite attractive to grazing animals, so, but very much restricted to the coast, and as its name suggests, largely restricted to Scotland. And the sea rocket, another coastal one found on sand pretty well all the way around the coast. Papilene maritima, a crucifer with 4 petals. And sea holly, this is the thing that Balaful Bay is famous for. Quite rare around the coast, but very distinctive when you see it. There's nothing else quite like it. And a couple more orchids, the common twayblade, which as its name suggests, has these 2 massive leaves at the bottom, and again is found in more base-rich places on maca and coastal grassland. And whereas the lesser butterfly orchid is more a plant of sort of more acid ground, moorland, and those kinds of places. I found I didn't have a picture of the greater butterfly orchid, so that's why I haven't got one of those. Which is the greater butterfly orchid is found is more particular in its requirements and found in slightly richer places and more richer grasslands, of a more neutral grassland rather than acid grassland, where the lesser butterfly orchid will be found. And then another real rarity, very particular to the west coast and the west of Ireland, Irish ladies' tresses, Spiranthes Roman Zophiana, which has its flowers in 3 sort of spiral rings around the stem. And this one flowers quite late in the year, so unless you happen to be in any of these places sort of in August or so, you might miss it. But when it's not flowering, the leaves just look like grass leaves. They're just very indistinct, so you really wouldn't notice it. But it's largely confined to the Outer Hebrides, the west coast, and the west of Ireland. It's regarded as nationally scarce. It's not as rare as some of the real rarities, but it's not common. And then a quick interlude on the Calmac ferry to get to Muck. This is Gallinach Bay on Muck, where we stayed a few years ago with a botany group trip. And a couple of the, I've just put in that, these things, you can find them anywhere. You don't have to go to Muck to see either of these 2 orchids, but I just thought I'd put them in this section. The common spotted orchid is the Dactyliza fuchsii, the one that grows in slightly richer places and has this very distinctly larger middle lobe to the lower lip, whereas the heath-spotted orchid is the common one of sort of moorlands and acid places. And you can see the middle lobe is really hardly any bigger than the two outside lobes. And then some of the marsh orchids, these are differentiated from the other orchids by having the two halves of the lower lip are very much folded back on themselves. So it looks like a piece of paper that's been folded in half with a sort of ridge down the middle. And the subspecies really seem to be named just because of the color difference. So this one is much deeper pink, and then the subspecies pulchella and subspecies incarnata, which is alleged to be sort of flesh coloured. Well, I'm not entirely sure any of this flesh is actually that colour, but anyway, that's the reason behind the name. And then heading north towards Skye again, here we come on to some of that limestone, which is not the very ancient metamorphosed limestone, but more recent stuff. And here you can find things like the Mountain Avon's Dryasoptopetala, which is one of the most, well, I think one of the most attractive little plants that you're likely to come across, with its 8 petals and its leaves like little tiny oak leaves. It's a very attractive thing, and only grows in really nice, rich limestone places. And another couple of things that grow in these kind of slightly richer places. Well, we've already seen the early purple orchid, but I just like the situation that one was growing in, looking out across the sound towards Rasay. That's Duncan on Rasay over there. This was on Ben Tierneveig in Skye. And then on the left, we've got the northern rock cress, Arabidopsis petrea, another little crucifer, which again is restricted to the sort of north with I think that might be Cwmidwal where it grows in Wales. But otherwise quite particular to the Highlands and Islands. And now we're heading back towards the west coast of the mainland, west of Ross. And this is Glen Shiel Lodge, where we had at the BSBI meeting a few years ago, in Duncan Donald's recording area. Although I find I haven't got a picture of Duncan, so he's not featured in this talk, although we were in his Vice County. But here are some other recorders. We've got on the left Paul Smith, who's the recorder for the Outer Hebrides, Ian Strawn, who's the recorder for West Inverness Shire, and Mick Crawley, who's the recorder for Northeast Sutherland. And what they're looking at here, all this undistinguished looking green stuff, is another huge rarity, Carex salina, a salt marsh sedge, which was only discovered to be growing in Scotland or in Britain in 2004, which again shows there are still things to be found out there. It was found by Keith Hutchin, who's a botanist who was doing a commission to do a survey of some of these salt marshes, and he first discovered it, and then Ian found it at the head of Loch Sunat as well, and it's been found at one or two other, oh God, I've done it again, one or two other places since then, which I can't now see on my screen. But right, moving on, another Western speciality, which I think nowadays would almost be called a speciality of what's called the Celtic rainforest now, the extremely oceanic woodlands of the west coast, is the narrow-leaved helleborine, Cephalanthera longifolia. And here this was it on a trip in Wester Ross. It's found in these sort of oak hazel woodlands on the west coast, and flowers quite early in the year. I think it's sort of late May, early June. It's I like a lot of these things, you've got to be in the right place at the right time, and then it never seems to occur in very huge numbers. It's always quite sparse when you do find it. And then still in Wester Ross, this is the bog at Red Point at I can't remember the other names for the locality. But on this coastal bogland, we were finding the bog orchid, Hamovia paludosa, which is not as big as it looks in the photo up at the top right, because where this again is John Crossley, who's the recorder for Orkney, and where his finger is pointing, that you see two little slightly yellowy green things. That is the bog orchids that are in the top photo. So it's incredibly small and insignificant, and if you didn't know what kind of habitat to look in or be there at the right time of year, and it's another one of these things that would be very easy to miss. So now we're nearly at the end now. If you're feeling travel sick from all this rushing around the country, back up to Ben Loyal on the north coast of Sutherland, which is a fantastically distinctive knobbly mountain, whichever way you look at it. This is the sort of west facing side of it. But if you go round, no, we haven't got round to the other side yet. This is my partners in crime for this trip. We always go up to Tongue for a week every year. Gordon Rotherow on the left, who we saw earlier on, Ian Evans, who's the recorder for Northwest Sutherland, and Gwen Richards, who also lives in Assynt, and Jess, the collie, who alas is no longer with us. Anyway, we have a trip up there every year. And this is where I thought we were going, the other side of Ben Loyal. You can see those knobbly knobs that we saw from the other side. And going up this side of the hill, you come across quite extensive areas of dwarf birch, Betula nana, and even find it flowering, which in a lot of places you don't really see it flowering very much. And you certainly don't see it getting more than about 6 inches above the ground, whereas here it grows up into quite tall bushes, because this is part of the estate now owned by Anders Poulsen of Wildland Limited, who's pursuing a policy of reducing deer numbers and encouraging wilding or rewilding, depending whatever you want to call it, of the landscape. And it's certainly noticeable how things are recovering once the grazing pressure is taken off the dwarf birch and the various other species. And this is where we stay in the shadow of this very distinctive hill, the Watch Hill, Ben of Freckerden, up at Tongue. And then one thing that can be found around the coast here is Carex maritima, the curved sedge. I mean, its stalk is always curved, and it has been described as looking like a rabbit dropping on the end of a stick. So that's what to look out for in these kind of damp, sandy places at the top of the shore, and in dune slack areas where the ground is damp for quite a lot of the time. But again, it's one of these things that's only really found around the coast of the north of Scotland. It may not be very spectacular, but I always think it's interesting to find these weird little plants that are very particular in their requirements. And a bit more of the Dryas octopetal, the mountain avens. This was on the side of Loch Erebol, where you can just walk along, and you're seeing it at eye level, which is fantastic, right down near the shore, rather than having to go right up on the hill to find it in a lot of other places. And so, as I said about the yellow saxifrage, that comes right down to sea level, and a bit, well, not on the coast, but further inland, it grows in these quite distinctive stony flushes, along with the black bog rush, Scienus nigricans. These are the tussocks of the Scienus, and then the saxifrage grows in between them. And lots of other interesting things, eliochorises and sundews and butterworts and all that kind of thing as well in these calcareous flushes. And then when you get out onto the coast, on the cliff tops, where you find this short sward that's probably quite well blasted by sea spray in the winter, salt spray coming up over the cliffs. And you get, again, a beautiful turf with all kinds of things in it. The clover, self-heal, bird's foot trefoil, and this little jewel in the middle, the Scots primrose, Primula scotica. Now that shows it at the actual size that it is. So it's pretty jolly small. And I remember speaking to somebody who'd been looking for it and said, no, I couldn't see it anywhere. I couldn't find it at all. And I said, well, you do realize it's only about an inch high. And she said, oh, I was looking for something the size of an ordinary primrose. No, it's not the size of an ordinary primrose. It's teeny weeny. And here it is, a bit close. I mean, this is the trouble. You see a photo like that and you think it's quite big, but in actual fact, it isn't. So we've made it up to the north coast. That's the distribution of Primula scotica. It's one of our few endemic species, closely related to another one called Primula scandinavica, that, as its name suggests, lives in Scandinavia. But obviously, this one has been isolated in Scotland long enough to have evolved off in its own direction and is now its own species, Primula, or our own species, Primula scotica, on the north coast and in Orkney. There's one dot in Shetland, but I'm not sure if that's native or if somebody tried to introduce it there. I wouldn't like to say. But anyway, I thought I'll finish on that one because it's really a lovely plant and a classic and something that's very special to our area. So with that, I'll conclude by thanking everybody who's accompanied me on all these trips over the years. The people who lent me their photos, most of the photos are mine, but all the ones that were other people's all had their names on. And then the web, well, we obviously know our own website name and all the rest of it. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Hope you're all still there and still awake.
I'm just flabbergasted by all the photographs. And the
Well, it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm sorry, it was a
real
quick
whistle-stop tour.
down.
As I'm going to write up your talk, what I'm going to just say is look at the recording on the website to see all the plants. I'm not even going to have to start scribbling for ages to write them all down.
Oh, try and write them all down.
Right.
Just say it was a whistle-stop tour. There were lots of plants.
I will say something like that and refer it and put the website address, I think, for the YouTube video. Thanks very much. I mean, that was amazing. That was amazing. I'm sure we've got lots of comments. It was good to see so many of those recorders. You just hear their names.
Yeah, so at least you know what some of them look like from the back, if not from the front, anyway.
Or what their bums look like, perhaps.
Yes, that's it.
A lot of bums in the air.
Bums in the air, yeah.
Yeah, so I found that fascinating. But is there anything you want to say or ask Ro about? Can I ask you something? I wanted to ask you, you said, or I introduced you saying you learnt on the job basically from all sorts of people. What was the most useful way of learning, do you think, that you found?
Oh, I just think going out a lot with people who know what they're talking about and just keeping at it. Because I mean, I learned most of my botany of that kind, plant identification with the BSBI, going out with the BSBI, which I joined several years after I'd left university, because we really didn't do that kind of botany at university. We didn't do we had one field course in Anglesey for a week. That was it in terms of actually identifying any plants in the field. So keep at it, and every year you learn a few, and then over the winter you forget them again, and then the next year you go back and hopefully you see some of the same ones and you remember them, and then you see some more different ones and hopefully you might remember some of them. And I reckon it takes, if you keep going, I would say it probably takes you about 10 years to get a reasonable grip of the flora of a particular area or part of the country. It just doesn't happen quickly. You just have to keep at it and keep keying things out when you can't identify them, and asking somebody to confirm whether you've got it right or not. It's a lot easier that you're battering away with a key and you're not sure if you've gone down the right route or if you're getting to the right thing. But then if you've got somebody like one of the recorders, for instance, who can say, yes, that is that, or no, that's not that, and this is why it's not that, and it's this instead, but you just have to keep at it, really. That's the main thing I would say.
Mm-hmm. But it sounds like I mean, obviously you were working in that field, but it sounds like almost your whole life was spent out, is
Well,
spent
yeah, I
out
suppose it was really.
recording.
I think I joined the BSBI in 1977, so that's yeah, it's kind of 40 something, yeah, slightly less than 50 years.
So I've got a bit of catching up to do, I would say.
I'm sure
Over
you'll
to
get there.
Brian's got his hand up. You wanted us?
All right, hello,
Only
Brian.
to say, well, just a comment really. Just the botany group's made a lot of contributions for Easter Ross to bog orchid. I remember on the Loch Fannic trip, Faye spotted it. I don't know whether you remember that, Faye, but it was.
Oh,
I think it was you actually, but it was quite unexpected. I mean, that's something
mm,
I think I've seen 3 times in Easter Ross. It's so elusive. I've never been back to that site there, but the other site uh, in NH19, I went back and it wasn't there. You know, these
because
orchids
it again,
come
like
and
a lot of
go.
orchids, they come and go, don't they? You know, one
Yeah,
year they're
yeah, yeah,
there, and then the next year they don't bother flowering, and then
yeah.
maybe a few years later they flower again. I remember
Mm,
looking for it with Lynn in somewhere in Mull, and you know have got a very exact grid reference. There was absolutely not a sign of it. You know, within we searched around this
mm.
edge of a lochen, and it wasn't. It just well, we were there at the right time of year. We got an exact sort of like 5 figures each way grid reference. It wasn't there, or if it was there, it was staying underground.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
There's still quite a lot of plants that need refinding in Easter Ross.
Oh well,
Melanophyllum sylvaticum. It's last seen in Corrie Field, which is a very, I don't know if you know that gorge going up at the top of Strathconnell, which I couldn't do
oh,
now. And we found it there. Well, it had been found before, but we found it, Bob and I found it 20 years ago. Sandy Payne Reef found it about 10 years ago.
mm-hmm.
That's our only recent site.
Oh well, that'd be
There's an unconfirmed.
worth a look.
No, I think actually, it might, no, I think that's the only one. It's recorded in the Black Rock Gorge. That needs confirmation actually, because I could never find it there. But ages ago, I think the botany
Oh,
group found it on the Black Rock
but it
Gorge. I
has
mean,
turned
you've
up.
got to you've got to be careful to distinguish it from
Yes,
pretense.
from the
It
other
can
one,
be
the
it
common.
can be confused quite often because you can't go on the color really. You've got to go on the shape of the
The shape of
flower.
the flower. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, that'd be worth a
I
look.
just ask, I didn't hear what the plant was. I didn't hear what Brian said.
Oh, they,
Melanopyrum sylvaticum.
Melonpyrum, right. Thank you
mm,
very much. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm
What's
not
that?
volunteering to go into the Black Rock Gorge,
I
though.
was going to say that sounds a bit hairy, the Black Rock Gorge. It's very steep, isn't it? Depending on exactly where the plant's supposed to be.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Maybe the Strathconnell one's simpler.
Or less of a health and safety hazard,
Less than that. I'm
maybe.
thinking about risk assessment, maybe less.
Yes.
Yes. Oh well. You're the trips organizer, Ro. Maybe we'll.
Well, I know, but I think we're looking at the number of suggestions we had at the last committee meeting. I think we're going to have plenty of trips this coming year. Yeah.
Oh, there's Bob. Yes, Bob.
Hi, this isn't really relevant to the area, but I noticed in one of the distribution maps, the one for pyramidal bugle, there was no recording for Southport, where I come from. And
Oh,
I've been seeing the pyramidal bugle since I was a schoolboy. And the last
oh.
time it was there was immediately after lockdown, so it must have been 2020. And it's still there, and it's easy enough to see. What should I do about that?
It wasn't on the map. Oh,
No, it wasn't on the map. It was there was some sort of Cumbria way, but nothing further south than that on the
oh.
west coast.
I'll write that down. Wait a minute. I don't know that I can. Passport.
Could you work out a kind of vague grid reference for it, Bob?
Well, I took a photo of it, so it should be
Oh,
something
well, you've
on
got
it.
a photo. Send it to the recorder for that area, whoever that is. I could probably find out.
Sorry, did you say Southport?
Yes, Southport.
Oh, okay, I live in Formby.
Oh, do you?
I don't know Pyramidal Bugle from round here, so that'd be really interesting. The recorder is Dave Earle, and his
Right,
contact details will be on the BSBI website because he'd be really interested. If you've got date and a grid reference for it, especially if there's a photo.
right, okay. I
So,
didn't
so
even.
whereabouts was it? Was it in
It was
the
up. It was up near Birkdale,
right?
um, beyond the old Cheshire Lines Railway, which is now the Coast Road. But I've seen it all over.
Okay,
Well,
yeah. Oh,
either I'm completely wrong, but I've been seeing it ever since I started wandering around there when I was about 16 and I identified it. It's a hairy thing. Anyway, I've got a photograph. So
okay.
Dave Earle, we'll
Dave
see.
Earle, yes, Vice,
Maybe.
South Lancashire, Vice County.
Right, okay.
You're going to be off to look for it later in the summer, Mary.
Well, definitely if I can get some grid reference. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of areas there that aren't easily accessible because is it where there's all the marram? It's
No, it's
really
in
rough.
it's in the dune slacks.
Right, oh, in the
Uh,
dunes. Right, okay.
um,
Big area to cover, but yeah,
oh
it's
yeah, it's a
definitely
huge
doable.
area, and a lot of it, of course, has been built on since I started. You know, around Ainsdale, which is where I come from. Uh,
Right.
an awful lot of it's been built on, but I'm sure I saw it the last time I was down there, which was immediately post lockdown. And I think that's when I took a photograph of it. So anyway, I'll have a look at my pictures and see.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. Yes, if it is there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, anyone else got anything to say? Or
Going back to Lismore, perhaps my memory isn't right, but I think Ro, you mentioned about was it small cow wheat,
Yes.
and it was generally distributed. Was it the
No.
seeds or something
Oh,
by wood ants?
yes.
Now I remember when we walked along the ridge, there were a lot of little. There wouldn't be. I don't know what kind of ants they were,
For
but a
other
lot
ants.
of little
Yeah.
nests of ants.
I
I think
mean,
that's right.
any sort of ants will do. It's just what I read
Uh-huh.
about wood
Yeah.
ants, you know,
I was
in
surprised to see
Scandinavia and other
lots of
places.
these wee clumps of ant hills as we
Hmm.
walked
That's
along.
correct. I
Yeah,
forgot
so
about
perhaps
that.
there
Don't
are ants.
remember
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, maybe it's not just wood ants. Maybe it's any
Mm-hmm.
sort of ant. Yeah.
Presumably, they
I
can
haven't.
pick up and carry the seed.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be.
Oh,
I mean,
oh
ants. I've seen
yes.
small ants. They're very strong. They pick up
Mm-hmm.
huge things.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they probably small ants could manage a
Mm-hmm.
melon seed. I should think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because there were a lot of those anthills on along that ridge.
Along the ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were. That's
Mm-hmm.
true. But
Huge
just
number.
I didn't see anything that resembled a wood ant's nest in that when it was
No.
a few of us went to look for it in it was under woodland sort of on on the sort of west side of Lismore, and but where it was I didn't notice any ants nests,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll have to look up what species of ants have been recorded on Lismore.
To RBGE about because they're actually doing quite a lot of work with small cowwheat at the moment.
Oh, are they? Oh,
Yeah, they're doing.
are they growing it? Are they growing it in cultivation?
They're growing it and they're planting it out.
Is that at Carrara or elsewhere?
So
'Cause
they're doing it in
that's
a
one of
number
the
of
other
different.
places where it is, isn't it?
Well, they've been doing it in a number of places, but I have to say, all the small cowwheat populations I've seen has been nowhere near wood ant nests. But so yeah, maybe it is
Yeah, that's
other ants.
yeah.
But
It's quite interesting that
yes, it
what
is.
extent it may or may not depend on the ants, you know.
Well, we found what I think Andy Scobie decided was the highest altitude one in Glawnam Keich, just at the west end of Glenafric.
Oh,
That was at over 800 meters.
wow.
There weren't any
Yeah.
wood ants up there.
No, many wood ants up there. Ah, oh well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, we still don't know enough about, really, aren't there?
Yep.
Because if you don't see it much, and when it's seen most often, there's these ant nests nearby, that becomes the association. But as you find more and more occurrences, then you realise it's maybe
Yeah,
just
maybe not.
maybe not at
Maybe
all.
it does
Maybe
better when the ants are there to distribute the seeds, but maybe it can operate without them.
doing their own.
Yeah.
I was interested in the picture of the Cheshire Islands because I kayaked around there. By the
Oh,
time
did you?
yes, came out from it was over several days. I didn't go there in a winter.
No.
But we were going to be camping on Lunga, which I think is the biggest one. And
Yeah.
we went down to the Dutchman's Cap and paddled as far as it, but we were so tired after where I think we'd come from Gomitra that day. We were so tired, we just kind of looked at it and thought, this looks a bit inaccessible. So I touched the rock. That was my claim to having got there. And we paddled back to where we were camping.
Longer.
But I mean, it was just it's just rock all the way
Yeah,
around.
yeah, it's very steep because we went with a bloke called Mark Jardine, who has a sailing boat based on Iona, and we went from there with him on this boat called the Bertha Marie, and he knew exactly where you could land, so we sort of anchored offshore and went on in a inflatable and had to scramble up this rocky, sort of quite cliffy, rocky bit to get out onto the sort of plateauy bit at the top. And then once you get there, again, because it's not been grazed, it's quite deep vegetation to get through till you get to the really steep slopes where it's very nice short turf because it's too dry and, sun-baked for anything much taller to grow. An interesting place, yeah.
It's very different. I mean, Faye was with me on that trip as well. Very different from Lunga, which is much more. I don't know. It's
yeah. It's not as
it's fertilized by puffins, I think.
Yeah, and it's got old buildings on, hasn't it, Lunga? Because we once camped
it was
on
lived on.
there.
It was inhabited. So
it was inhabited. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, as a wandering botanist, you certainly got about.
Quite a lot of years to get about in.
Oh well, I don't think I'll ever catch up, but it's fascinating to hear you talking about it, and I'm quite jealous of all these trips to all these places.
Well,
And,
thanks for coming because it's a bit pointless talking if nobody turns up. So
yes, but we'll hear about your exploits next year as well. What else you get and what new things you got.
yeah, see where I go next year.
Yeah. Anyone got anything else you want to say? Okay, well, thank you very much again, Ro. And you'll have to tune in next month when I'm afraid it's me, or it is me, talking about the flowers of Slovenia. It's really what I did in my holidays. That's what I'm going to give you. And I'll try, and you can maybe guess the flower, or no, Elizabeth, that's actually not that flower, but I've done my best. And I've managed to cut down my flower selection from 570 to 109. So I think I've done pretty well. So thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Ro, for such an enjoyable talk. And
thanks.
Let's hope we all survive the storm. I hear the wind has risen now, so I'm glad none of us have got to go home.
Yes, that's the great thing about Zoom.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.